If you had been there that night on Privet Drive, you might not have noticed me at all. That street was the sort of place that liked to pretend nothing strange could ever happen upon its neat pavements and carefully trimmed hedges. Yet the air already felt different to me as I came down from the sky, the motorbike humming under my hands. I am no poet, but I remember how the cold bit my cheeks and how tightly I held the bundle in my arms, as if the darkness itself were trying to snatch him away. He was so small, smaller than you would expect from a child who had brought down the darkest wizard of our age. When I landed at the end of the street, the motorbike gave one last growl and fell silent, and for a moment the world was so still that I could hear the baby breathing against my chest. No crowds, no cheering, no fireworks of light, only a sleeping child and the faint smell of smoke clinging to my coat, like the ghost of a battle that refused to leave. Albus Dumbledore was already there, standing under a street lamp whose light kept flickering and going out. Professor McGonagall waited on the low wall, now a stern woman in tartan robes, her back straight, her eyes sharp and tired. They had been talking long before I arrived, weighing the fate of one small boy as if they held a set of scales that could tip the whole world. I am not used to feeling clumsy, but that night my hands felt like they were made of stone. I swung myself off Sirius Black's motorbike, and suddenly the only thing that mattered was that I did not wake the baby. My fingers fumbled with the blanket. I remember whispering his name for the first time, Harry, as soft as I could manage, and how strange it sounded in the quiet of a Muggle street that had never meant to hear it. Dumbledore came closer, the silver of his beard catching what little light remained. He looked at the child as if he were seeing not a bundle in old blankets, but a whole future in front of him, fragile and blinding in equal measure. He showed me the letter he had written, the one that would try to explain to Lily's sister why a boy with a scar shaped like lightning was now lying on her doorstep. I could not read all the words in that moment. I only saw the names and felt something heavy pressed down on my chest. It is an odd thing to deliver a child to a place you do not trust. I had heard enough about the Dursleys to know that they disliked anything they could not understand, that they were afraid of whatever did not fit the narrow shape of their lives. Standing there, looking at the neat number 4 on the door, I wondered if we were not abandoning the boy to a different kind of danger, the quiet and polite cruelty of people who believe themselves perfectly normal. McGonagall spoke up, giving voice to more doubts than I ever could. She talked of fame, of the wizarding world crying his name, of streets filled with owls and shooting stars. Then she looked at the baby and lowered her voice, as if afraid to disturb his sleep, and asked if it was right to leave him with relatives who had never wanted our world near them. Her words were sharp, but beneath them I heard something softer, almost like fear. Dumbledore listened, as he always did. He said that Harry would be safer growing up without knowing who he was, that there was a protection older and stronger than any charm if he stayed under the same roof where his mother's blood still lived. At the time, I trusted him completely. I still do more than most. Yet even now, when I remember the way Harry's tiny hand curled around my thumb before I handed him over, I cannot help but ask myself whether safety is always worth the loneliness that comes with it. Perhaps you have watched someone you care for walk into a place that looked respectable from the outside, yet felt wrong deep in your gut. You tell yourself it is for the best, that in time they will understand the choices that were made for them. But you still wonder whether a tidy front garden can ever make up for the absence of a warm pair of arms, and a voice that says, "You belong here." When Dumbledore drew the light from each street lamp, one by one, Privet Drive sank into a darkness that felt almost gentle. The stars came out sharp above the roofs. The babies stirred when I shifted my grip, as if the change from brilliance to shadow had reached him even through the layers of cloth. In that softened darkness, the house looked less like a barrier and more like a cradle that did not yet know it was holding something precious. I carried Harry up the path. His head was no heavier than a large owl, yet my arms shook. The door was plain, its paint unchipped, its brass polished. I laid him down as carefully as I could on the step, tucked the blanket around him, and placed the letter where Petunia Dursley would be sure to see it as soon as she opened the door. For a heartbeat, I almost knocked, almost demanded that they wake up and look upon what had been entrusted to them. Instead, I stepped back, feeling my throat close. There is a kind of courage that roars and charges forward, the sort that songs are written about. Then there is the quieter kind, the courage to leave and let life take its course, however much you want to stay. I am not sure which kind is harder. I only know that as I stood there with Dumbledore and McGonagall watching the bundle on the doorstep, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in all my life, though I towered over them in height. We walked away in the end, our footsteps hushed on the pavement. The street settled back into its ordinary silence. Behind us, the boy slept on, unaware that his name was being whispered elsewhere, unaware that a small scar had already made him into a symbol. That night taught me that stories rarely begin with trumpets. Often they begin with tired voices in the dark, and with a sound so small no one notices it. The sigh of a baby turning in his sleep as the door behind him waits to open. There are years in a life that pass loudly, marked by events and clear victories. Then there are years that drag on in silence, changing things slowly like water carving a stone. Those 10 years after we left Harry on the doorstep of number 4 Privet Drive belonged to the second kind. Privet Drive stayed neat, its hedges clipped, its curtains tightly drawn at night. Whenever I thought of the boy behind that door, I felt as if a clock were ticking somewhere out of sight, measuring a childhood that did not know it was meant to be different. I did not watch him every day. The work at Hogwarts never really ends. There are beasts to feed, pumpkins to plant, keys to polish, 100 chores that keep the hands busy. Still, whenever my errands took me over Surrey, I would let the motorbike drift a little lower. To anyone looking up, it would have seemed a bird flying home late. To me, it was a chance to glance down at a row of identical roofs and wonder which one sheltered a boy with a lightning scar. News of Harry reached me in scraps. Dumbledore would say that the protection still held, that the Dursleys remained as stubborn and ordinary as ever. Professor McGonagall once remarked that the child was small for his age, that he looked like someone who had grown used to making himself smaller still when others looked at him. She said it lightly, but her mouth was tight. I remember gripping my fork and picturing a thin boy in clothes that did not fit, standing just out of the light in a kitchen that smelled of boiled vegetables. Later, I would learn about the cupboard under the stairs, about the way his cousin Dudley grabbed the biggest portions at the table, and the best of everything, while Harry settled for what was left. At the time, it was only a heaviness that would not leave me, a sense that while he was safe from curses and Death-Eaters, there was another sort of harm pressing against him every day. The harm of being told you are less, of being hidden away whenever guests come, of hearing your name spoken only when there is a chore to do. Maybe you have seen a child like that, the one who hangs back in the playground, letting others choose the games, the one who wears clothes a little too large, as if his body is always borrowing space rather than owning it. No one curses him, no one raises a wand, yet under that steady drizzle of indifference, something inside begins to bend. It does not break, not yet, but it learns to expect very little. On nights when the wind rattled the windows of my hut and the fire burned low, my thoughts wandered back to that doorstep. I pictured Petunia Dursley finding the boy at dawn, her thin fingers clutching the letter. I imagined Vernon staring in horror at the name Albus Dumbledore, a talk of magic and sacrifice he would never truly understand. In my mind, they always argued in whispers, afraid to wake the child even as they decided to pretend that everything written there could somehow be ignored. What does it do to a boy to grow up in a house that refuses to speak of the truth that shaped him? Each unexplained thing, each moment when something odd happened around him, must have added another layer of fear and irritation to the Dursleys, and another layer of confusion to Harry. A vanished glass pane at the zoo, a haircut that grew back overnight, a jumble of strange dreams about a flash of green light. None of that would have looked like destiny from inside that cramped little world. It would only have looked like trouble. I sometimes caught myself resenting Dumbledore in those years, only a little, and always in the privacy of my own heart. He trusted the old magic of blood and home, believed that the power which had saved Harry from the killing curse would guard him best if he lived under the roof of his last remaining family. I did not know enough to argue with that. Still, there were evenings when I fed the hippogriffs and felt my chest ache with the thought that somewhere a boy who had a place at Hogwarts did not yet know the castle existed. And yet, childhood can be stubborn. Even in unfriendly soil, small joys take root. I like to think there were days when the sun fell just right on the playground, and Harry forgot himself for a moment in a game of chase. Maybe there was a teacher who smiled at him without comparing him to Dudley, or a neighbour who dropped a kind word about his green eyes. In every hard story there are these tiny lights, half overlooked, and they matter more than people realize. Looking back, I see that those 10 quiet years were shaping Harry into someone who did not take kindness for granted. A boy, much praised and pampered, might have strutted into our world with his head held too high. Harry arrived with the wary gratitude of someone who had rarely been chosen. That difference mattered. It made him quick to notice those who were left out, quick to defend the small and voiceless, whether they were first years, or dragons, or house elves. Suffering does not make a person noble by itself, but it can carve a space inside where compassion has room to grow. Still, we must ask ourselves whether any child should have to learn empathy by first swallowing so much neglect. Is it right to accept a lesser sort of pain simply because it leaves no scar that glows under lightning and dark magic? When we call someone safe, do we sometimes mean only that we no longer have to be brave on their behalf? Those years have no grand battles to mark them on a timeline. They are not written on chocolate frog cards or sung about in wizarding songs. Yet they are part of the story all the same. Harry did not step from a cupboard into a world of spells as a blank page. 10 years of being overlooked had already been written into him, line by quiet line. By the time the first Hogwarts letter arrived, he was already the boy he needed to be to receive it. He just did not yet know that a different life was finally reaching out its hand. I remember the day Dumbledore told me the letters had begun. His eyes were brighter than usual, as if some long-awaited signal had finally been lit. It was late afternoon, the sky over the castle the colour of old parchment, and I was just coming up from the pumpkin patch when he called me into his office. On his desk lay a stack of parchment envelopes, all the same creamy colour, each addressed in that familiar green ink. The sight of them sent a strange shiver down my spine. After 10 years of silence, Hogwarts was knocking on Harry Potter's door. Each envelope bore his name. Not simply Harry Potter, but Harry Potter. The cupboard under the stairs. 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The address was so exact, it cut straight through the air between us. Dumbledore's mouth curved into one of his slight smiles, but there was something harder beneath it. A school may not always see into the hearts of its students, yet it can at least see where they sleep. That detail told us more about Harry's life than any report from a neighbour ever could. You might think a letter is only paper and ink. Yet some messages change everything the moment they arrive. A school acceptance, a job offer, a note that says someone has been thinking of you. Dumbledore's first letter to Harry was all of that at once. It was an invitation, a revelation, and a promise that the boy in the cupboard was meant for more than dust and spiders. To me, those envelopes looked less like pieces of parchment and more like keys cut precisely to fit a lock that had waited far too long. Only they never reached his hands. Later, when Harry told me the story himself, I could almost see it as he spoke. The first letter sliding through the letterbox, addressed to him in a way no one had ever bothered to be. Uncle Vernon snatching it before the boy could open it, his face turning that particular purple that seems to rise from the collar upward. Dudley gawping. Aunt Petunia shrieking about nonsense and freakishness. The letter torn away, its promise folded shut before it could unfold its meaning. Dumbledore, of course, did not stop with one letter. More came, and with each one the address grew more precise, as if the castle were gently insisting that it knew exactly where Harry stood in that house and would not be put off. Harry Potter, the smallest bedroom. Harry Potter, the floor beside the cupboard. Even now, thinking of it, I feel a grim sort of satisfaction. If people will not speak the truth aloud, sometimes the ink must do it for them. In my mind, I picture the scene like a play that grows more frantic with every repetition. Vernon blocking the front door at the first rustle of an envelope. Petunia snatching letters from Harry's fingers. Dudley grabbing for one just to see why his father was so afraid of it. The whole house turning into a battleground over a name written on parchment. Harry in the middle, puzzled, his heart beating faster each time he glimpses that green ink and the crest of Hogwarts on the seal. You may have experienced something similar, though without quite so many owls. Perhaps a chance that frightened the people around you, because it did not fit their ideas of what a safe life should be. a scholarship to a school far away, a job in a field no one in your family understood, a friendship they thought was unsuitable. Instead of celebrating the door opening in front of you, they tried to shut it, not always out of hatred, but out of fear. To them you were safer, small, familiar, predictable. They forgot that a soul can suffocate in such safety. The more Vernon fought, the more letters came. They slid under doors and through keyholes. They arrived folded inside the milk bottles and crammed into the chimney. Owls swooped by the windows at odd hours, their wings brushing glass and tile. The Dursleys tried to flee from them, piling into their car, driving down motorways and back roads, ending up in a tumble-down hut on a rock in the sea. They believed, poor fools, that distance could keep destiny from catching up, as if waves and wind could hide a boy from a school that had already written his bed into its address book. I was not in Surrey to see that stormy evening when the letters finally stopped coming. I was on my way, the motorbike growling beneath me, rain stabbing at my face. Dumbledore had looked at me very calmly that morning and said it was time. The letters had done all they could. If words on parchment would not be allowed into that house, then a large man with a pink umbrella would have to knock down the door. I do not think I have ever been asked to do anything that made me as fiercely glad as that simple task. Still, part of me wished the letters could have been enough. There is something beautiful about the idea that a child might walk into his fate through the front door, letter in hand, rather than having it burst in on him during a thunderstorm on a lonely rock. How different it might have been if Harry had been allowed to open that first envelope in peace, to trace each line of ink with his eyes, and feel the world widen around him of its own accord. We might ask whether the way a calling arrives shapes the way it is carried. Harry's welcome to our world came not as a gentle invitation, but as a struggle, wrested from adults who were determined to keep him in the dark. Did that teach him too early that truth must always be fought for, that no gift will be handed over without a struggle? And if so, is that a lesson a child of 11 ought to learn so quickly? For all that, those letters did their work. They proved something important about Hogwarts itself. The castle did not forget Harry. 10 quiet years had not erased his name from its rolls. It knew where he slept. It knew the exact corner he was pushed into. And it would not stop calling until a door, one door or another, finally opened. A letter can be torn up, burned, thrown into the bin. Yet the fact that it arrived at all can never be undone. Somewhere deep within, the receiver knows that another life was offered. Harry may not have read the first envelope addressed to him, yet I like to think that the echo of it remained, a faint ring in the air around him, making him just restless enough to dream of something beyond Privet Drive. By the time I reached the shack on the rock, the last letter had already brushed past the chimney and been swept aside. The sea roared, the wind clawed at the boards. Inside, one small boy lay on the floor under an old coat, counting the seconds to midnight on his 11th birthday. He did not know that an entire world had been trying to speak to him for days. He did not know that the moment the clock marked his first breath of a new year of life, someone would bang on the door who could not be silenced with a slammed letterbox. We like to imagine that chances are endless, that if we ignore one opportunity, another will knock soon enough. Yet some invitations belong to their exact hour. Miss them and everything changes. The letters addressed to Harry Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, were like that. They were the last gentle knocking of destiny before it decided to come with thunder. The sea was raging that night when I set out to find Harry. The motorbike cut through the rain like a stubborn beetle, its engine protesting every gust of wind. I could feel the storm in my bones and in my beard, water streaming down so fast that my fringe clung to my forehead. Yet, under all that noise, there was a sort of quiet inside me, the kind that comes when you know that whatever waits at the end of your journey will change everything that follows. Dumbledore had given me the address of the place the Dursleys had chosen for their escape. A rickety hut planted on a rock in the middle of a grey sea. I still remember the first glimpse of it. A crooked shape hunched against the waves, windows boarded, roof patched and sagging. It looked like the kind of place where the wind had more rights than the people inside. I wondered if that was how the Dursleys saw magic too, as a storm to be shut out by nails and planks. Bringing the motorbike down was no easy task. The wind shoved at us from all sides, and the spray from the waves slapped my face raw. When the tires finally touched stone, I almost laughed with relief. The hut loomed ahead, a blacker smudge against the darkness. I could just make out light seeping through cracks in the boards. Somewhere in that miserable little box, a boy was about to turn 11 without cake, without candles, with only the sound of his cousin snoring to mark the hour. I trudged across the rock, my boots slipping on wet seaweed. The door was a mean little thing, thin wood, a bolt not worth the metal that made it. I lifted my hand and knocked. The sound rang out over the storm, a heavy booming that made the hut shudder. Inside, someone yelped. A voice demanded to know who was there. Another knock answered. If the letters had been the polite tap of opportunity, this was destiny pounding with its fist. What happened next has been told in more exciting words than mine. To me, it was simple. Vernon tried to stand between me and Harry with a metal thing in his hands that he believed would protect his family. I took it from him and made sure it would never frighten anyone again. I did it gently for someone my size, but the sight of twisted steel was enough to quiet the protests in the room. Storms outside are loud, but there is a different kind of hush that falls when people realize the world is larger and stranger than they wanted to admit. In the corner lay Harry, thin as a reed, wrapped in a coat that was not his, eyes too old for his face. He stared at me as if I had stepped straight out of one of the odd dreams that had always troubled him. I must have looked a sight, giant of a man, hair wild, coat soaked, a pink umbrella clutched in one hand, a slightly squashed box in the other. I felt suddenly awkward, like a bull invited to a child's tea party. So I did the only thing that felt right. I handed him his birthday cake. A simple thing, a bit damp from the journey, icing slightly smudged. Yet, when he took it, it was as if the room shifted. No one had ever marked his birthday with such care before. You can tell when a gift is the first of its kind. People hold it too carefully, afraid it might vanish if they blink. Then came the words. I told him what Dumbledore had sent me to say, that he was a wizard, that there was a school waiting for him, that he did not have to spend the rest of his life accepting whatever scraps the Dursleys chose to throw his way. I watched his face as each piece fell into place. Confusion, disbelief, a flicker of hope, more disbelief. Years of being told he was nothing wrestled with the sudden idea that he might be something, someone, after all. The Dursleys fought hard in their own way. They used words sharpened by fear, insisting that Harry was odd but not magical, that his parents had been fools, that the life I spoke of was dangerous and wrong. It is one thing to face curses shouted in Latin. It is another to stand in a cramped room while people spit on the memory of a friend with everyday words. I felt my temper rise more than once. But there was Harry, small and still, caught in the middle, trying to drink in a story about himself he had never heard before. He needed truth more than he needed a shouting match. Most of us meet ourselves gradually. We learn who we are through small conversations, quiet realizations, the slow stacking of days. Harry met himself in a single night. In less than an hour, he learned that his parents had not died in a car crash, that the strange things that had happened around him were not madness, but magic, that he carried a scar shaped by a curse meant to kill him. Imagine being told your whole story has been kept from you, not by strangers, but by the people who tucked you into bed and poured your breakfast. Have you ever discovered that something important in your life was built on a lie? A family secret suddenly revealed, a truth about your past kept from you by those who said they were protecting you. The room does not have to be filling with sea spray, and the roof does not have to be shaking for your world to tilt. Sometimes a simple sentence whispered across a table can throw every memory into a new light. As I spoke, the storm outside roared all the louder, as if it wanted to drown out the new words forming in Harry's mind. Wizard, Hogwarts, Quidditch, wand. They sounded clumsy in my mouth, rough things, yet they were the true names of the life that had been waiting for him. The Dursleys clung to their version of the story like sailors to wreckage, insisting he was just a boy, just Harry, just a nuisance they had kindly taken in. They did not see that just can be a chain when it is used too often. In the end, the choice was not really theirs. Magic runs deeper than stubbornness. Blood and sacrifice, promises made in the dark. All of that had already claimed Harry long before the first letter fluttered through their door. What remained was for him to decide whether he would step forward into the place that called his name. When he asked about his parents, his voice barely more than a thread of sound, I felt the weight of every answer I could give. I told him what I could without turning grief into spectacle. I spoke of Lily's bravery, of James's recklessness and heart, of the night a green light flashed and a curse rebounded. I did not tell him every detail. Some truths are too sharp to press fully into a child's hands all at once. The important thing was that he knew he had been loved, that he had been fought for, that he was not a burden dropped on a doorstep out of pity. Looking back, I wonder what would have happened if I had faltered, if I had let the Dursleys' shouting drown out my own voice, if I had softened the reality until it sounded like another bedtime tale that would not survive the morning. We sometimes think that being gentle means avoiding hard truths. Yet there are moments when kindness is telling a child that the world is both more terrible and more beautiful than he has been led to believe, and that he has a place in it all the same. By the time the wind began to tire and the waves lost a little of their fury, something inside that shabby hut had changed. Harry was still thin, still wearing clothes that did not fit, still 11. The Dursleys were still fearful and angry. The roof still leaked. But a line had been crossed. The boy who curled under that coat was no longer only a cupboard child. He was also a future student of Hogwarts. He knew his name in a new tongue. When he finally looked up at me with that mixture of awe and doubt and said he wanted to come, it felt less like a victory and more like a right thing slipping back into its proper place. The world had tried, for 10 long years, to pretend that Harry Potter did not belong to magic. On that stormy rock, with rain streaming down the windows and a squashed birthday cake between us, the pretense could not hold any longer. We may ask ourselves how many children sit tonight in their own versions of that hut, rooms where they are told a smaller story about themselves than the truth would allow. People swear they are protecting those young hearts from disappointment and danger. Yet, perhaps, the greater kindness is to knock on the door, soak the floor if you must, and say firmly that their lives are meant to be bigger than the walls around them. Morning came grey and heavy over the sea, but inside that hut everything felt different. Vernon snored in one corner, clutching his blankets as if they might shield him from the word wizard. Dudley hunched on his makeshift bed, staring at me as though I might turn him into a frog at any moment. Harry watched the light creeping through the cracks in the door with the quiet attention of someone who knows that, for once, the day is going to be nothing like the last. We left the hut as the tide began to pull back, the rocks slick, but no longer drowning. I launched the little boat with a shove that sent spray over the sides. Harry climbed in, clutching his new coat around him. The journey back to the mainland should have taken a fair bit of time, but there is no harm in a touch of magic when the air still tastes of cold and salt. With a muttered word, I gave the boat a push it would not have managed on its own. We skimmed over the waves, and Harry gripped the edge with both hands, half frightened, half thrilled. Some memories of that crossing cling to me more than others. The wind in Harry's hair, the way he kept glancing back at the shrinking shape of the hut, as if to be sure it was really disappearing. I have seen many students board the Hogwarts Express, trunks ready and parents fussing, but this was the first time I watched a boy leave his old life behind in a boat, without even a suitcase to his name. Once on dry land, my first thought was breakfast. You cannot expect anyone to face Diagon Alley on an empty stomach. In a small cafe by the station, Harry ate sausages and eggs as if he were afraid the plate might vanish if he looked away. He listened while I explained a little more about our world, though his eyes were fixed on the newspaper in my hands. The Daily Prophet headline shouted about the break-in at Gringotts that would happen later that same day. At the time, it was just another story in black ink. I did not yet know how closely our errands and that headline would brush against each other. London greeted us with its usual racket, traffic grumbling, people rushing past, everyone too busy to notice a giant and a thin boy squeezing through the crowds. I led Harry to the Leaky Cauldron, the old little pub wedged politely out of sight between a bookshop and a record store. To Muggle eyes, there was nothing there at all. To Harry, it appeared slowly, as if his gaze had to adjust to a new kind of truth. The moment we stepped inside, the noise dropped to a different sort of hum. Wizards and witches paused halfway through their tankards. Old faces turned toward the door. Then someone whispered his name, Harry Potter. It passed from table to table like a rumour into which people had poured all their hopes. They pressed forward, not too close, eager to shake his hand, to say they had met him. I watched Harry in that small whirlpool of attention. He flushed, looked down, tried to answer politely, though he did not understand why these strangers cared so much. Fame sat on him like a cloak 2 sizes too big. He did not preen or bask. He only seemed more bewildered. There is something painful about seeing a child treated like a symbol when he has not even been allowed to be a boy. Professor Quirrell was there too, in his odd turban, stammering as he greeted us. If I had been less busy watching Harry, perhaps I would have wondered more about the nervous way Quirrell's eyes flickered. Instead, I clapped him on the shoulder and ushered Harry through to the back courtyard, thinking only of the moment to come. The wall there is one of my favourite places in London, though most who pass nearby never suspect it. A row of grubby bricks, a few bins, the smell of smoke and old cabbage. I took out my umbrella, counted the bricks with care, and tapped a certain pattern. Harry stared, concentrating so hard you would think he was doing the magic himself. The bricks shuddered, shifted, folded away. The arch opened like a stone curtain, and beyond it, Diagon Alley spilled into view, noisy and bright and jumble-crowded. For a heartbeat he did not move. Then he stepped through. To a boy who has known only one dull little street, Diagon Alley is a kind of thunder. Owls hooted from high perches. Cauldrons gleamed in shop windows. Robes fluttered, cats meowed, children tugged at their parents' sleeves. The air smelled of parchment, ink, animal fur, and something sharper that was simply magic. I watched Harry's face and saw wonder crack through the shell of caution he had built around himself. He turned this way and that, not sure where to look first, afraid perhaps that if he blinked too long the alley would close again. We went to Gringotts first. Business before pleasure, Dumbledore had said. The white marble steps, the goblins behind their high desks, the clink of coins echoing from deep below the ground. Harry stared as I handed over the key to his family vault, the one Dumbledore had entrusted to me, and as we sped down in the rickety cart, he clung to the sides with wide eyes. At the bottom, when the goblins swung open the door to his vault, and the light glinted off piles of gold, Harry gasped. It was not greed in that sound. It was disbelief. For a boy who had grown up counting every scrap, the sight of so much wealth waiting quietly in the dark was almost an insult to the hunger he must have felt on more than one evening in Privet Drive. I told him it was his, that his parents had left it for him. He stepped forward slowly, picked up a galleon as if it might burn him. It was one of the few times I have seen gratitude, astonishment, and grief all on a face at once. From there we went to Vault 713, where I collected the small wrapped package Dumbledore had asked me to fetch. I slipped it into my pocket and said as little as possible. Harry glanced at it, curious, but did not ask. Trust is a strange thing. He had known me less than a day, yet he accepted that some questions would have to wait. I felt the weight of that trust as surely as I felt the weight of the mysterious bundle at my side. The rest of the shopping was lighter, though no less important. Robes in Madame Malkin's shop, where Harry met a pale boy who boasted about Quidditch teams and family names. A stack of books from Flourish and Blots that nearly reached his chin. A pewter cauldron, vials, a telescope. I watched him run his fingers along the spines of textbooks, and thought of all the years he had been given nothing more magical than a cracked plastic soldier or a second-hand jumper. I insisted on buying him an owl. A good one, snowy and proud, with amber eyes that seemed to look right through a person. When Harry held her, she regarded him for a long moment, and then settled as if she had been waiting for his hands in particular. I have always believed that certain creatures know where they belong better than we do. Last came the wand at Ollivander's. The shop smelled of dust and wood shavings, and boxes were stacked to the ceiling. Mr. Ollivander appeared like a memory, pale eyes shining. A wand after wand failed in Harry's hand, a shower of sparks here, a dead silence there, until the right one chose him. Holly and phoenix feather, supple and bright. When he lifted it, a warm wind seemed to ripple through the air. Ollivander murmured about twin cores and destiny. Harry simply stared at his hand, as if wondering whether it was really his fingers guiding the wand or the other way round. Many of us remember the first time we walked into a new world. A university campus where no one knew our name, a foreign city whose signs we could barely read, a workplace filled with strange machines. We bought our first tools, shook unsure hands, pretended we were not afraid. Harry's day in Diagon Alley was that feeling sharpened, every discovery humming with the knowledge that his entire life had to stretch suddenly to contain it all. Yet we might still ask whether it is fair to leave so much wonder until so late. 10 years of emptiness followed by a single day overflowing with proof that he had always been meant for more. Would the magic have felt less like a shock if it had been allowed to seep into his childhood slowly? Or did the stark contrast, the cupboard to the alley, give him a sense of humility that a softer path would not? By the time the sun dipped between the crooked roofs, Harry was laden with parcels and new names, dazed and quiet. He had met more eyes in one day than in some entire years before. As we turned back toward the leaky cauldron, he looked once more down the length of Diagon Alley. I could not see his face from where I walked, but I like to think that, just for a heartbeat, he felt something settle inside him. The feeling of a key turning in a lock, of a story finally recognizing its main character. The day we left Diagon Alley, London seemed its usual self, impatient and noisy. Yet beside me walked a boy carrying an owl and a wand, and I knew nothing was the same. Harry held his Hogwarts ticket as if it might blow away, though the train it promised would not leave for weeks yet. We squeezed onto the underground, him staring at the coloured lines, me talking too loudly about ghosts and Quidditch, until a woman shuffled further down the carriage. Back on Privet Drive, the lawns were trimmed, the curtains neat, as if the street were determined to deny the existence of everything Harry had seen that day. I walked him to the doorstep, trunk bumping behind us, owl glaring from her cage. The house looked smaller, as though Diagon Alley had stretched his eyes, and nothing ordinary could quite shrink them again. I knelt to give him the ticket properly. Cream card, black letters, the words Hogwarts Express, platform 9 3/4, 11 o'clock. Harry read it once, then again, lips moving. I saw the confusion dawn even before he spoke. He had never heard of a platform with a fraction. Of course he had not. It struck me then how often we forget that the things we take for granted in our world sound impossible in his. I told him there would be other wizarding families at King's Cross. All he had to do was look for them and follow. It sounded simple when I said it, but simplicity can be a kind of cowardice when it glosses over the fear underneath. A boy who had spent his life being mocked for every question was now expected to find his own way through a barrier no one had warned him about. The Dursleys appeared in the doorway, silhouettes against the light. Petunia's mouth was pinched, Vernon's moustache twitching. I told them the time of the train. Vernon grunted that he supposed they could take the boy, if only to see the back of him. It is a bitter thing to hear someone talk like that about a child, especially one you know was once held like treasure in another pair of arms. I wanted to say more, but Harry was watching, shoulders slightly hunched, and he had had enough scenes for one day. Leaving him there felt wrong in my bones. On the night we first laid him on that step, he had been asleep, swaddled in ignorance. Now he stood there fully awake, aware that somewhere far away a castle waited with his name on a roll of parchment. He knew just enough to long for it, but not enough to reach it without help. As I strode away, cloak flapping, I told myself he had survived 10 years under this roof. He could face one last month. Still, the thought sat badly with me. Like a stone I could not swallow. I did not see him at King's Cross. Creatures at Hogwarts do not pause their feeding because a train is leaving London. Yet, as September approached, my mind kept wandering to that station. I imagined him standing bewildered between platforms 9 and 10, ticket in hand, the stream of muggles flowing around him as if he were a rock in a river. Confusion can wake every old shame. One wrong look from a passer-by, one impatient shove, and all the old whispers of freak and useless can come rushing back. Later, I heard how it truly went. Vernon dropped him at the station with a smirk, making a cruel joke about platforms disappearing. No instructions, no good luck. Harry, left alone with a trunk too heavy to move and an owl that made him stand out, began to pace the length of the platforms, searching for numbers that refused to reach 3/4. Then, as often happens in our world, help arrived disguised as something ordinary. A plump woman with bright hair shepherding a crowd of children, all of them chattering about Hogwarts as if it were the most natural word in a Muggle station. Harry heard one of the boys ask about platform 9 3/4. That small scrap of sound must have felt like a rope thrown into deep water. He went to her and asked how to get on. She did not mock him or question his blood. She simply smiled and showed him how to walk straight at the barrier. I have seen much grander magic. Yet there is something about that simple instruction that still moves me. Walk straight at the barrier. Trust that what looks like solid stone will open. All his life, Harry had been told to keep his head down and avoid trouble. Now he had to learn that sometimes the only way forward is to risk looking foolish in front of strangers. He ran at the wall and passed through into steam and scarlet. The Hogwarts Express waited, bright as a new beginning. Students leaned from windows, trunks piled, owls hooting. From that moment he was part of it, not the boy left outside staring in. He found a compartment, shared sweets and nervous talk with Ron Weasley, met Hermione Granger with her quick wand and quicker questions, endured Draco Malfoy's smooth insults. In that narrow slice of train carriage, his future friendships and rivalries began to take shape. While the train rumbled north, I was in my hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, chopping meat for the Thestrals, pretending I was not listening for a whistle I could never hear from so far away. I kept glancing toward the distant hills as if I might catch a glimpse of red between the trees. It is a strange thing to feel your heart riding a train you are not on. We often think journeys start when landscapes change, but they usually begin with a decision no one else notices. For Harry, it was the moment he tightened his grip on his trolley and walked at the barrier, because a stranger told him it would be all right. That step broke more than the illusion of brick. It cracked the belief that his world must always be small. The doors were meant to stay shut. Sometimes I wonder whether I should have been there beside him, a large figure at his elbow, to scare off unkindness, to wave as the train pulled away. Yet I suspect that if I had done so, a piece of courage might have been stolen from him. There are thresholds no one can cross for us. A friend can point to the barrier, can tell us others have gone through and lived, but in the end we must lean forward ourselves and trust the wall to open. We may ask whether it is fair to expect such bravery from an 11-year-old who has been given so little reason to trust the world. Perhaps it is not. Yet in that unfairness lies the truth, that growth rarely asks our permission. It simply arrives with a ticket in hand and a time printed clearly. The train will not wait forever. Harry chose to board it. That choice, more than any prophecy, is where the real magic of his story begins. By the time the Hogwarts Express screeched to a halt at Hogsmeade Station, the air in the valley had turned crisp and sharp. The sky was a deep indigo, the kind that makes every lantern flame look golden. I stood on the platform with my lantern held high, watching the carriages slide past. Steam wrapped around my boots. The sight never gets old. That moment when doors open and the train spills out its cargo of voices and trunks and owls and nerves. First years are easy to spot. They are the smallest, the ones clutching their cages too tightly, eyes wide and searching. I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted the old words that I had heard someone shout when I was young. First years, this way, first years to the boats. My voice echoed off the dark hills, and the new students clustered toward me, drawn by the certainty that someone knew where to go. Harry was among them, glasses fogged from the steam, owl in her cage glaring at everything and everyone. He stood close to Ron, the two boys a little apart from the rest. I could see the question in his face again, the one that never quite left him in those early days. Do I really belong here? I greeted him as cheerfully as I could, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for us to see each other again at the edge of a black lake under a star-punched sky. We picked our way down the steep path to the shore. The lake lay quiet and dark, the castle still hidden behind the curve of the hill. I lit the lamps at the prow of the boats, each one bobbing gently. 4 to a boat, I called, the same as every year. Harry climbed in with Ron, Hermione and Neville, awkward knees knocking together. They held their trunks and each other with equal care. Then came my favourite part. Forward and off we went. The boats moved across the water without oars, gliding smoothly as if pulled by invisible hands. The students leaned over the sides, staring at their reflections, listening to the soft slap of water only just audible above their whispers. Halfway across the lake, the castle rose into view. Towers and turrets outlined against the sky, windows blazing with light. The great bulk of the fortress reflected in the black water below. Gasps rose from the boats, Even those who had grown up hearing stories about Hogwarts went quiet. There is something about seeing it for the first time from the lake that not even the best story can prepare you for. It is like turning a corner in your own life and finding that your house has been waiting for you all along, fully lit, doors open. I stole a glance at Harry. His head was tilted back, eyes fixed on the highest towers. For once, no wariness, no calculation, only awe. Whatever scraps he had been told by Ron or glimpsed in Diagon Alley, they had not contained this. Quite right, too. Certain things ought to be bigger in reality than in the telling. We reached the landing, and I called them out of the boats. Legs wobbled, trunks scraped, somebody dropped a toad. The first years followed Professor McGonagall inside, up the worn stone steps and through the big oak doors. That part of the journey is hers, not mine. I watched them disappear into the castle and felt a familiar mixture of pride and worry. I have seen so many children cross that threshold. Each one brings their own ghosts and dreams, and the castle receives them all without comment. Later, I took my seat at the staff table in the great hall. Candles floated in mid-air. The ceiling reflected the starry sky outside, and the long house tables were crammed with older students already chattering about the summer they had just left behind. The doors opened, and McGonagall led the first years in, a small nervous line under the gaze of hundreds of eyes. The sorting hat sat on its stool, patched and ugly, ready to sing its yearly song. As the hat finished its verses and the first names were called, I kept my eyes on Harry. Sorting is a strange business. Some children barely touch the hat before it shouts a house. Others sit for long minutes, brows furrowed as it whispers in their ears. You can see a lifetime of choices crowding around a child in that moment, waiting to see where they will begin. When Harry's name rang through the hall, a ripple went down the tables. Harry Potter, out loud, in the heart of Hogwarts, with no attempt to hush it. He walked to the stool, shoulders stiff, and sat down. The hat dropped over his eyes, swallowing his face. From where I sat, I could not hear its voice, but I could see the tension in the line of his jaw. The paws stretched. The hat seemed to be arguing with itself. Everyone whispers about that hesitation now. They talk of how close he came to Slytherin, of the twin cores of the wands, of the way darkness and light tangled around his name. At the time, all I knew was that I wanted him in Gryffindor. I wanted him at the table where his parents had laughed and quarrelled and planned mischief. I wanted him near the red and gold that had once meant home to me in another life. When the hat finally shouted Gryffindor, the hall exploded into cheers. The Gryffindor table banged their hands on the wood, older students whistling. The Slytherin table tightened, a little line of disappointment. Harry pulled off the hat, looking bewildered and relieved all at once, and made his way to the space that had opened for him between Ron and a boy named Seamus. The Weasley twins threw their arms up, shouting their welcome. It might have seemed a simple thing, another boy sorted into another house. But house colours are more than scarves. They are the first walls a child chooses around themselves. In being placed there, Harry chose courage over cunning, heart over ambition, or so the stories say. Perhaps the truth is more complicated. Perhaps the hat saw in him a soul that had already survived more than it should have, and decided that he needed a table where loyalty and fierce affection came quickly. We like to imagine that our labels capture who we are: brave, clever, loyal, ambitious, lion, eagle, badger, serpent. Yet most lives are far messier than 4 neat piles. Children grow in directions no hat can fully predict. Harry was not only brave, he was curious, stubborn, sometimes reckless, sometimes hesitant. But in Gryffindor he found friends who valued the part of him that stepped forward when fear said, "Step back." That mattered. The feast began, plates filling themselves, goblets brimming. Harry stared at the sudden arrival of food as if it were another spell performed just for him. I watched him eat, laughing a little at Ron's antics, listened as Dumbledore rose to make his odd and welcoming speech, felt the ancient rhythm of the year settle around us. To the students, it was all new. To the staff, it was another turn of a wheel that had been spinning for centuries. Perhaps you remember your own first night somewhere that would shape you. A dormitory, a training barracks, a shared flat far from home. You found your place at a table or in a bunk, accepted a bed and a set of rules. Listened to the noise of strangers who would one day become your people. At the time, it felt like chaos and confusion. Only later did you look back and see how many threads began weaving together right there, over the clatter of cutlery and the scrape of chairs. From my seat at the edge of the staff table, I let my gaze travel down to the 4 house tables. Faces blurred together, a sea of black robes and pointed hats. Yet Harry's head always drew my eyes. He laughed when the ghosts swept in, jumped when one of the older students made a joke about Peeves. When the time came to sing the school song, he listened, uncertain, then joined in, his voice lost among hundreds of others. That, perhaps, was the greatest change of all. For years, his voice had meant nothing in his own home. Here, it blended into something larger without being swallowed. As the feast ended and candles burned lower, the prefects led their houses away. Gryffindor filed out under their banner, Harry somewhere in the middle of the knot. I watched him go, feeling an odd tightness in my chest. He did not look back. That was good. The castle was ahead of him. The forest and my hut could wait. There is a time to wave and a time to let a boy walk forward without any reminder that he is still being watched over. We may wonder how different his path might have been had the hat shouted another house. Would friendship with Ron and Hermione have held as strong? Would he have found other mentors, other enemies, other parts of himself? The question is impossible to answer, yet it lingers. In the end, though, what matters most is that when given some say in the matter, Harry asked not to be placed where power alone would thrive. For an 11-year-old just learning who he is, that is no small choice. The first weeks of term at Hogwarts always feel like the castle is breaking in a new pair of boots. Corridors echo with wrong turns and late footsteps. Classrooms buzz with voices that have not yet learned when to fall silent, and the staircases amuse themselves by confusing everyone. From my hut by the edge of the forest, I could feel the energy of it all, like a low hum in the stone. Harry was somewhere inside that hum now, no longer the boy in the cupboard, but the thought still made me glance up at the windows more often than before. He came to visit me soon enough. I heard the knock on my door one afternoon, heavy and uncertain. When I opened it, there he stood with Ron, both of them a bit wind-blown from the walk down the slope. Fang bounded forward at once, tongue lolling, nearly knocking Harry over. The boy laughed, that quick, startled sound children make when a large dog chooses them. It was a better welcome than any polite greeting I could have planned. I made tea, strong and sweet, and set rock cakes on the table. They came out harder than I intended, as usual. Ron nearly broke a tooth, but Harry chewed gamely, too polite to complain. We talked about lessons, about how strange it felt to sleep in a room full of 4 posters and snoring boys instead of in a cupboard, about ghosts drifting through plates at dinner. He told me about Draco Malfoy and the way the boy kept tossing the word Potter around as if it were a coin he owned. Then Harry mentioned flying lessons. His eyes lit up in a way I had not seen before. He had never been on a broom, he said, but he liked the idea of riding the air. I nodded and tried not to let my own excitement show too much. Flying is one of the few things in this world that makes even the worst day feel lighter. The thought of Harry finding that same joy made my chest ache in a good way. The story of what happened at the first lesson reached me before the boys could come down again. Hogwarts carries tales the way trees carry leaves. A gust of gossip and whole branches shake. Neville Longbottom had taken off badly, of course, frightened and wobbly, and ended up with a broken wrist. Madam Hooch whisked him away to the hospital wing, leaving the other students with strict orders to keep their feet on the ground. That was when matters went crooked. Malfoy snatched up Neville's remembrall, taunting the poor boy even in his absence, waving the glass ball where everyone could see it. Harry told him to stop. Malfoy sneered, climbed onto his broom, and took to the air. Any sensible child would have stayed put. Harry did not. He kicked off, lifted cleanly, and rose to meet him. I did not see it with my own eyes. I heard it retold, first by students with wide gestures, then by McGonagall herself in clipped tones that could not hide a certain reluctant admiration. Malfoy flung the remembrall high, expecting Harry to fail. Instead, the boy shot forward. In his first real flight, he tucked himself low over the broom, felt the wind pull at his hair, and dove. He caught the glass ball a breath before it would have shattered. Came up again with his hand held high, prize unbroken, as if he were born to it. Rules had been broken. That much was certain. Yet McGonagall did not punish him. She marched him straight off the lawn, disappeared into the castle, and delivered him to Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. By evening, the whispers were everywhere. Harry Potter, youngest seeker in a century. Every school has its games, the ones that sort students into new maps of glory and embarrassment. A football pitch, a dusty courtyard, a broken hoop tied to a brick wall. The first time a quiet child is picked for something other than last place can feel like a spell that lifts how they see themselves. I remembered my own clumsy attempts at flying and felt oddly proud that where I had always been too heavy for grace, Harry had found the sky ready to welcome him. When Harry and Ron told me the whole tale by my fire that night, they made it sound half terrifying, half joyful. Harry's hands moved as he described the dive. Ron could not stop repeating how Malfoy's face had looked when Harry caught the remembrall. I grumbled about broken rules for form's sake, yet inside I almost cheered. Some talents can only be discovered by stepping where a sign says, "Do not." Still, the question lingered. What should we praise in a child? The obedience that keeps both feet safely on the grass, or the instinct that sends him into the air to catch something precious before it shatters. Hogwarts has its detentions and point systems, yet it also has Quidditch cups and house banners that honour daring. Do we risk teaching our students that the only courage that matters is the kind that makes a good story for the common room? The first Quidditch practice came soon after. From my hut I could hear the distant shouts, the crack of bat on bludger, the faint crowding of voices whenever Harry made a particularly good turn. Wood drilled him mercilessly, sending quaffles hurtling past at all angles, releasing the little golden snitch into the air, and making Harry chase it until his fingers shook. It was hard work, but when Harry came down at the end of each practice, cheeks flushed, hair in every direction, there was a satisfaction in his grin that had nothing to do with fame. On days when the pitch was quiet, I would sometimes take a moment to imagine him up there anyway, a small figure against the sky, trusting the broom under him, trusting his own instincts, after years of being told to keep his head down. This was the first time his quickness and nerve were not punished, but celebrated. That is a powerful change. Many of us remember the first teacher or coach who looked at us and said, "Not stay out of the way, but we need you." At the same time, lessons in other classrooms tested him in slower ways. Potions with Snape, where every small mistake was magnified. Transfiguration and charms, where Hermione shone and Harry tried to catch up with someone who had devoured their textbooks weeks before. You can fly like a champion and still feel foolish when a feather refuses to levitate at the right moment. Hogwarts had a way of reminding every student that brilliance in one field did not grant you a free pass in all the others. When Harry sat in my hut listening to the wireless or feeding Fang bits of sausage, he spoke of these things with a mixture of frustration and humour. He laughed about Ron's miscast spells, groaned about homework, puzzled over Snape's hostility. I did my best to reassure him that professors sometimes hide their concern under sharpness, though in Snape's case it was a truth more complicated than I could share. I wanted Harry to see school as a challenge, not a battlefield. Yet I could not deny that danger and glory seemed determined to knot themselves around him. The same spirit that sent him after the Remembrall might one day send him running toward far darker things than a stolen toy. Was it right that we clapped when he caught the ball, without also teaching him carefully how to tell when not to leap? There is a difference between risking a bruised wrist and risking a life. Children cannot always see it. Adults sometimes choose not to. We still ask ourselves what kind of bravery we most admire. The impulse that makes a boy dive through the air to defend a friend's property is kin to the courage that will make a young man face far greater threats later on. But without guidance, that same impulse can turn reckless, can burn him up too quickly. Perhaps the real work of a school is not to crush daring, nor to praise it blindly, but to teach it to walk hand in hand with wisdom. As autumn deepened and the first match drew nearer, banners began to appear in the common rooms. Strategies whispered in corridors. Harry's name was on many lips, sometimes in awe, sometimes with resentment. From my place at the edge of the grounds, I watched the small figure on the broom loop and dive again and again in the fading light. Somewhere between the cupboard and the sky, between punishment and applause, a boy was learning who he might be. The troll on Halloween had helped more than any timetable to settle that first year. It had smashed more than stone. When you survive a bathroom with a 12-foot brute and come out alive, you do not go back to polite nods. Harry, Ron, and Hermione emerged as something like family. They bickered and sulked, but in the comfortable way of people who expect forgiveness. When they knocked on my door, they came together, talking over one another, dumping snow from their boots without waiting to be invited. I saw Harry begin to relax into the idea that he was wanted. He reached for a second mug of tea without checking anyone's face first. He shoved Fang away when the dog drooled on his robes and laughed instead of flinching. He complained about homework, about potion fumes and Snape's glares, as if his opinions mattered. That may sound small, but to a boy whose life had taught him to be grateful for the crumbs of attention, daring to believe you deserve an ordinary share is a quiet revolution. As December crept over the hills, talk in the Great Hall turned to going home. Letters flew, dates were discussed. Harry stayed. The Dursleys had not asked for him, and he did not want to ask for them. He tried to make it sound like a convenience, nothing more, but the shrug did not quite hide the hurt. I answered with stories of Hogwarts at Christmas, trees that brush the enchanted ceiling, icicles that never melt, puddings that arrive wreathed in blue flames. His eyes followed every word, as if he could already see it. When the last carriage rattled away, taking most of the school with it, a different hush settled over the castle. The corridors were emptier, the common rooms smaller, yet the remaining students seemed to breathe more freely. For the first time in his life, Harry faced Christmas without being in the way. He helped me drag a fine fir from the forest, steadying the trunk while I heaved it through the doors. Later, he stood on a chair in the Great Hall, hanging baubles while I floated candles into the branches. Candlelight turned his glasses to coins of gold. Christmas morning brought him presents that were truly his. A knitted jumper and fudge from Mrs. Weasley, sweets from classmates, my own clumsy parcel with rock cakes and a wooden flute. And there was the cloak. Old, fine fabric that shimmered faintly, wrapped with a note naming his father. When he showed it to me later, the cloth pooling in his lap, I felt James closer than I had in years. An old mischief seemed to stir in the very air of my hut, as if glad to find its way back to James's boy. Holidays thin out watchful eyes, and children test the spaces between rules. Cloak over his shoulders, Harry slipped through the castle after curfew, discovering how different familiar corridors look when they belong only to footsteps and torchlight. One of those wanderings took him to a room he did not remember seeing. Bare stone, lingering chill, and in the centre a single tall mirror, its frame carved with curling shapes and words he could not read. At first he saw only himself there, a small boy in borrowed pyjamas, hair pointing in every direction. Then new shapes formed behind him, a man with the same untidy hair and round glasses, a woman with his eyes and a smile that seemed to know him. Others gathered, faces he had never seen yet somehow recognized. They stood close, shoulders touching his, looking at him with pride and delight, as if he were their whole reason for being. He told me later how he kept going back. Night after night he crept under the cloak, sat on the cold flagstones and stared into that glass until his legs went numb. He watched the man laugh, the woman reach for him, filling in details no photograph had ever given. For a child starved of family, the mirror offered a feast that never ended. He knew he was breaking rules. Still, he returned, caught between guilt and a hunger older than any school regulation. Dumbledore found him there in the end. I was not beside them, but Albus spoke of the mirror with a gravity that told me enough. He explained that it was called the Mirror of Erised, that it showed not the future, nor anything useful, only the deepest desire of the one who stood before it. Men had wasted away before its surface, he said, forgetting to live because they preferred the picture of what might have been. A dangerous kind of magic, not because it lies, but because it tells one narrow truth over and over, until it fills the whole world. Soon after, the mirror disappeared from that quiet room. Dumbledore moved it to a place where its powers could serve a harder purpose. Harry was left once more with the ordinary corridors, his friends, his homework, and the silence where his parents should have been. Longing does not vanish when its favourite image is taken away. Yet something in him had changed. His mother and father were no longer just names. Others spoke with careful voices. In his mind they now stood, moved, smiled, reached out to him. Even if the mirror had drawn on imagination as much as memory, it had given his grief a face. We might wonder what we would see in such glass. Success, perhaps. A wrong mended, a wound never made. Or something humbler. A table where everyone we love is seated and no chair is empty. And if we knew that staring into that vision too long would hollow us out, would we be able to turn away? The mirror does not only reveal desire, it tests whether we can hold that desire and still choose the world as it is. Harry did, not easily, not without a last long look. But when Dumbledore told him to stay away, he obeyed. He turned from the glittering ghosts of the family he never had, and went back to late nights in the common room, essays, Quidditch practice, and quiet talks by my fire. For an 11-year-old boy, that simple act of walking away was its own kind of courage. In leaving the mirror, he took a first step toward living with loss, instead of trying to hide inside the dream of undoing it. News travels at odd speeds in Hogwarts. Some things flicker through the halls like sparks. Others creep slowly, weighed down by embarrassment. The tale of my dragon began quietly, and ended as a story students still whisper whenever they want to explain why adults ought to know better. For me, it started in the leaky cauldron one evening, with a mug of mead, tired feet, and a hooded stranger who knew exactly how to tug at the softest part of me. He asked harmless questions at first. How were the grounds? What beasts did I look after? Had I ever seen anything as impressive as a three-headed dog? I talked because talking about creatures has always been as easy as breathing. I described the hippogriffs, the spiders in the forest, even Fluffy, who slept most peacefully when someone played him a tune. The stranger nodded, storing each word away. I took his attention for kindness. I did not see it for the net it was. The talk slid toward dragons, and my good sense slid with it. A Norwegian ridgeback egg, he said, as if mentioning a simple curiosity. He set it on the table, warm and speckled. My hands trembled. Dragon eggs are rare and tightly controlled, kept far from school grounds and wooden huts. Yet in that smoky light, all I saw was a chance to raise a creature I had loved in books since I was a boy. I bought the egg. Somewhere he walked away with both my gold and the secret of how to get past Fluffy. Back at Hogwarts, I built the largest fire my hearth had ever seen and settled the egg above it. Smoke curled from tiny cracks. I watched it for hours, humming nonsense songs and imagining Norbert soaring over distant mountains one day. Harry, Ron and Hermione found me like that, cheeks hot from the blaze, eyes fixed on the shell. Their horror was almost comical at first. Then they coughed on the smoke, and I heard the fear behind their protests. They reminded me of the rules. They talked of the ministry, of neighbours, of curtains that did not like stray sparks. I answered with stories of dragon mothers, of misunderstood beasts, of how wrong it was to treat something magnificent as nothing but danger. Love can make a person deaf. Mine certainly did. I told myself that because I meant well, and because Norbert was small, no harm could truly come. Many foolish choices begin with those two excuses. The egg hatched at last, shell split, claws flailed, wings unfurled. Norbert sneezed sparks, tried to bite my boots, clung to the edge of the table with his sharp little talons. My heart near burst with pride. To me he was perfect. To the children he was a living warning. They saw how quickly he grew, how his appetite stretched, how smoke began to leak from my chimney in suspicious streams. They understood that the situation was already larger than my hut. I refused to admit it. Then Ron was bitten. Norbert's fangs left an angry mark that sent the boy to the hospital wing. I sat by the fire, face in my hands, listening to the dragon thump around the room, and could no longer pretend this was an adventure with no cost. It was Hermione who named the path out. Charlie Weasley knew dragons better than any of us. He and his friends could take Norbert to Romania, where a wild creature could burn and roar without putting a school at risk. The plan that followed was pure madness, wrapped in good intentions. Harry and Hermione hauled Norbert in a crate through corridors under the invisibility cloak, struggling up stair after stair while I paced the hut and imagined ministry officials at my door. When I think of it now, I see adults who should have taken that burden. At the time, I let children shoulder it because my own courage ran only as far as keeping the dragon close. On the tower top, Charlie's friends fastened ropes around the crate and lifted it between their brooms. Norbert screeched, beating frantic wings, then dwindled to a blot against the moon. I watched from below, throat tight. A piece of me went with that crate. Yet, as the night settled, the air around Hogwarts felt strangely clearer, as if the castle itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Harry and Hermione did not receive thanks for what they had done. They were caught returning and punished, losing points and earning detention. The house glared at them. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that I had lit a dangerous fire and left children to stamp out the embers. That shame sits heavier than any fine the ministry could have handed me. Looking back, I see every step where I might have chosen differently. I see how a stranger's flattery and my own hunger to protect strange creatures led me to give away knowledge that should have stayed locked behind my teeth. Many of us have our own Norberts, a project we clutch too tightly, an indulgence we call harmless, an idea we refuse to release though it singes everyone nearby. We tell ourselves it is love. Often it is something more tangled. Perhaps you know that feeling in smaller ways. Clearing a shelf of possessions that once defined you, stepping away from a job that impressed others but hollowed you out, ending a habit that made you feel special while quietly hurting those around you. The first night without it feels wrong, almost bare. Only later does the air taste cleaner. The real lesson came from the children. Harry, Ron, and Hermione moved toward what was right even when it cost them respect and sleep and house points. They helped me let go of something I wanted in order to safeguard people I loved. They reminded me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for what is wild, in beasts or in yourself, is to set it free where it can truly live, even if your own heart has to learn how to beat around the empty space that freedom leaves behind. Detention is an ugly word, but it does not always mean the same thing. For some students it means lines and dusty classrooms. For Harry and his friends, it meant walking beside me into the forbidden forest on a night when the moon hid behind clouds, and even the trees seemed to listen. I had patrolled that forest for years, yet leading children into it never sat easy on my heart. Their punishment grew from the dragon and from late-night wanderings. It was meant to teach caution, to show that some rules exist because the world outside the common room can bite. At the same time, work needed doing. Something was hurting unicorns. Even the fiercest beasts of the forest keep a kind of reverence for them. Unicorns are older than our quarrels, bright pieces of some gentler order. To find one dead is like seeing a star fall into the mud. We met on the lawn as the sky darkened. Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Draco Malfoy stood shivering, whether from cold or from stories they had heard about the forest I could not tell. Fang padded at my side, heavy and eager, but far more cowardly than he looked. I handed out lanterns, watched their faces leap out of the dark in brief orange flashes. Malfoy tried for a sneer and managed only a gulp. We crossed the line where the trimmed grass ended and the forest began. The air changed at once. Damp earth rose around us, rich and heavy. Branches knitted together overhead, swallowing most of the moonlight. Somewhere far off, a twig snapped in a way that was not the wind. I told them to stay close, to keep to the path, to remember that if I said run, they were to run without argument. Sometimes comfort has to stand beside blunt truth. The trail we followed was ugly. Silvery drops of unicorn blood gleamed on leaves and roots, beautiful and terrible all at once. We split into two groups. I took Hermione and Neville. Harry went with Malfoy and Fang. I did not like leaving them, but the forest is wide, and the sooner we found the creature, the better its chances. I turned back more often than I should. Lantern swinging, catching faint glimpses of Harry's light bobbing deeper between the trunks. Every forest has its own temper. This one holds centuries inside it. Spiders as large as carriages, centaurs who read the stars, trees that remember iron. Yet that night, all of it felt hushed. Even the wind moved carefully, as if unwilling to disturb something larger taking shape. Neville stumbled, Hermione gripped her wand tighter, and I filled the silence with small stories about bowtruckles and stubborn thestrals. An ordinary joke can be a rope to hold in a dark place. It was not our group that found the first unicorn. Harry told me later how it lay in a clearing. White coat turned grey in the dimness. Legs folded as if asleep. Blood pooled under its flank, that same silver turning black where it soaked into the soil. A hooded figure bent over the body, face hidden, mouth at the wound, drinking. Death is hard enough to face when it comes cleanly. This was something worse, a feeding that broke every law the forest lived by. When the figure lifted its head, Harry glimpsed what lay under the hood, and a pain tore across his scar so fierce it drove him to his knees. Malfoy screamed, Fang bolted, and the hooded thing slid toward the boy, drawn by a pull none of them understood. Just as it reached him, hooves crashed through the undergrowth. A centaur, Firenze, burst into the clearing, bow raised, and flung Harry onto his back before galloping away among the trees. I only know the rest from Harry and from centaur gossip carried on later nights. Centaurs are proud and private. They read the movements of planets and prefer not to meddle in the affairs of wizards. To them, history is not a tale of choices, but of patterns written long ago in the sky. Yet Firenze broke that habit. With Harry clinging to his mane, he ran, hooves striking sparks from roots, speaking in his deep, rolling voice about the evil that drinks unicorn blood. He told Harry that such blood will keep even a dying soul alive, but at a terrible cost. Kill the innocent to save yourself, and you gain a half-life, cursed from the first drop you swallow. No charm can clean that stain. Other centaurs stepped from the shadows, Bane and Ronan, manes tossing, eyes bright with anger. They condemned Firenze for carrying a human, for interfering with what the stars had marked. They spoke of Mars, bright and blood-red, of destinies that must be allowed to unfold. Firenze answered that a child lay in danger, and that whatever the sky had written, no creature with a heart should stand aside and watch. In that clash between fate and mercy, Harry's small weight on his back was the whole argument made flesh. The stars may chart the broad shape of storms, but someone still has to decide whether to open a door to a drenched traveller. When I finally found Harry again at the forest's edge, his face was colourless, eyes wide, scar still throbbing faintly. Hermione and Neville hovered near him, trying not to stare. He told me what he had seen: a dead unicorn, a hooded figure drinking its blood, pain like a knife in his forehead. I understood enough to feel the ground tilt, not because unicorns are only symbols, though their loss wounds the forest, but because of who might be desperate enough to drink their blood and haunt our trees like a bodiless hunger. Back in my hut, with the fire roaring and tea forced into their hands, the chill of the forest clung to them like a second skin. Harry stared into the flames as if expecting the hooded shape to step out. Hermione asked quick questions, trying to carve order from fear. Neville sat unusually straight, as if sheer uprightness could keep him from shaking. I longed to promise that nothing like that would ever threaten them again. Instead, I told them that Dumbledore knew more than he said, and that Hogwarts had protections older and stronger than any curse. It was not the whole truth, but it was the truest comfort I could give without lying. We like to tell children that monsters live only in stories, that goodness is rewarded and evil always ends cleanly at the bottom of a page. Yet there are times when the kinder thing is to admit that the world can hurt what is pure without any neat reason, and then to show that they will not face that knowledge alone. After that detention, the shadows in the corners of my hut seemed thicker. Fang whimpered in his sleep. I lay awake listening to branches scrape the roof and thought of silver blood on roots and a boy whose scar had started to ache again. Perhaps you have known your own forest, a season when you discovered that life can wound the innocent and protect the cruel, at least for a while. A good worker laid off while a schemer is promoted. A gentle friend struck by illness while the selfish carry on untouched. You walk out of such times changed. You may be more cautious, but you are also more fiercely protective of any goodness you can still reach. For Harry, that night under the trees marked the end of simple wonder. The castle, the lessons, the Quidditch cheers all remained. But threaded through them now was the knowledge that the evil which had scarred his forehead was not a finished tale tucked safely in the past. It moved under cloaks, borrowed other people's faces, drank from innocent veins to stay alive. The tidy story he had once been told of a villain gone and an orphan left to grow quietly had cracked. In the space of that crack, a harder truth took root, and with it the first understanding that bravery in this world would mean more than catching a golden ball in the sun. In a school like Hogwarts, danger rarely arrives all at once. It gathers first in whispers and odd looks at the staff table, in questions children do not quite dare to ask. By the time a threat shows its full face, 100 small warnings have already walked past you in busy corridors. Looking back on that year, I can see how the pieces slid into place around the Philosopher's Stone long before any of us admitted what picture they formed. It began with Dumbledore's quiet decision to move the stone from Gringotts. He asked me to fetch a small, wrapped parcel, nothing more, and I did it gladly, proud to be trusted. That very day there was an attempted robbery at the same vault, already empty. Someone had been close behind us in the dark under London, reaching for something that would give them more than gold. When I read the headline in the Prophet, the air around Hogwarts felt thinner, as if the castle had drawn in a breath and was holding it. We met not long after in a cramped stone room off an upper corridor. Dumbledore explained that the stone would be hidden in the school, protected by spells and traps devised by several of us. He did not speak like a man asking for volunteers. He spoke as if he knew what each of us would offer and was merely setting the pieces on the board. Around the table, faces glimmered in lamplight, older and younger, suspicious and calm. Still, when he finished, none of us refused. The plan was simple in its outline and intricate in its workings. Professor Sprout promised a tangle of enchanted plants that would grab and choke anything that blundered into them. Flitwick described a storm of flying keys, each charmed to dodge every reaching hand except one. McGonagall's eyes flashed when she spoke of a life-sized wizard chess set that would not move unless commanded by someone willing to stand in the path of its blows. Snape, fingers steepled under his chin, outlined a line of potions that could only be passed by thought and logic rather than brute power. My part was fluffy. No subtleties there. A 3-headed dog is as clear a warning as any sign could be. I would set him over the trapdoor, muzzle to muzzle, paws planted, the low growl in his throat's doing most of the talking. I knew how to calm him. I knew that music would send him snoring, all 3 mouths slack. I did not say that part out loud unless asked. The fewer details spoken, the better. Or so I told myself. When the meeting ended and we spilled back into the main corridors, I felt strangely proud. Hogwarts had turned itself into a fortress, ring upon ring of protection around a single stone. Yet pride does not always sit alone. Underneath it, unease curled. The stone was now in the same building as hundreds of children, some ambitious, some restless, all of them clever in ways no adult can fully predict. The questions from Harry and his friends began not long after. They came to my hut with arms full of books and excuses about homework that were too clumsy by half. What sort of creatures make good guards? How long can a big dog stay awake? Do certain plants hate fire? Their voices tried for casual, but their eyes were tight and bright. I, fool that I was, answered as I always do when talk turns to beasts. I told them about Fluffy. I let slip that he was mine, that I had bought him from a man in a pub, that music sent him straight off to sleep. It felt like ordinary conversation, the kind that warms an evening and makes tea taste better. Only later did I realize I had handed them a key and told them how to turn it. When they left that night, their steps were quicker, their whispers sharper. I watched them go and felt something small and cold settle in my stomach. It is easy to blame them for meddling, but their meddling grew from ours. We brought the stone into the castle. We shrouded it in secrecy, let our worry crackle in the air like static, spoke in half hints that any sharp-eared child could string into a story. When adults talk around a danger instead of plainly, younger minds fill the space with their own explanations. Those guesses are rarely smaller or kinder than the truth. At the same time, the forest told another story. Unicorns lying dead among the roots. Hoof marks of centaurs running hard. Harry's scar burning again, Quirrell growing paler, smelling more strongly of fear and something worse. Snape watching Harry with an intensity a boy could mistake for hatred. Threads crossed and tightened toward some point none of us could quite see. The castle felt like a chessboard. We thought we were the players. In time, I learned that some of us were pieces being moved by hands we never saw. Harry and Hermione came one evening without Ron. Their questions were sharper. Could a teacher be serving the dark? Which one knew the most curses? Who had the most to gain from the stone? Their fear had hardened into resolve. I gave the only answer I knew, that Dumbledore trusted his staff and that they were to leave matters alone. Even as I spoke, the words sounded thin to my own ears. Trust is a heavy word to lean on when there are cracks in your own judgment. My dragon. The stranger in the pub. The loose talk about Fluffy. I had already proved that loyalty does not always keep a man from being used. If I could be turned into a doorway without knowing it, why not another member of the staff? Children are quick to hear doubt in a pause. I saw Harry note it, storing it away not as a reason to obey, but as one more sign that something important was being kept from him. We liked to tell ourselves that the children did not need to know more. The stone lay hidden. The protections glittered like armor. We wanted to believe that the hardest choices would fall to us, not to an 11-year-old already marked once by a killing curse. Yet fear and secrecy rarely stay where you put them. They seep into dreams and rumors and footsteps in the dark. By the time I understood how far Harry, Ron, and Hermione had stepped onto the same board as the adults, they had already begun to move according to their own fierce sense of right and wrong. The protections we laid were strong. We forgot that sometimes the smallest hands in the castle are the ones most determined to test every locked door. The night everything came together, Hogwarts looked almost ordinary. Candles floated over the house tables, homework sprawled beside plates. Ghosts drifted lazily through walls. Yet the stone under my boots felt tight, as if the castle were listening. Then the owl from the ministry arrived. By evening Dumbledore was gone, summoned away on business that sounded urgent and official. One empty chair at the staff table should not change much, but it did. With him out of the building, every corridor seemed a little longer, and the shadows a little deeper. I did not see Harry, Ron, and Hermione that night. I did not see them slip beneath the invisibility cloak, hearts pounding, convinced that if they did not act, the stone would fall into the wrong hands. What I know comes from their halting stories afterwards, and from the sharp, guilty arguments among teachers once the danger had passed. Children's memories and adult excuses do not fit together comfortably, but they tell the same tale. They went to the forbidden third floor, the door we had warned them from since September. Inside, Fluffy lay sprawled, 3 heads slack, paws twitching in sleep. An enchanted harp in the corner played a thin, repeating tune. Even the fiercest guardian can be undone by the right song. The 3 of them edged past his paws to the trapdoor between them. They pulled it open and looked into blackness. No one was waiting there to catch them. They jumped anyway. They fell into Devil's Snare. Cool tendrils wrapped at once around ankles and ribs, tightening whenever they kicked. Panic feeds that plant. Calm weakens it. Hermione remembered what Sprout had taught. She forced herself to be still, forced the boys to stop struggling, then conjured fire. Light and heat flared. The plant recoiled. Coughing and bruised, they scrambled free and staggered into Professor Flitwick's chamber, where hundreds of winged keys whirled through the air like bright, vicious insects. A broom waited under that beating cloud. 1 key, and one only, would fit the door. Harry mounted the broom and rose into the swarm. Metal wings cut his hands and slapped his face, but he kept his eye on the slightly battered key, whose flight was different from the rest. Twice it escaped him. The 3rd time his fingers closed on cold metal. When the lock turned and the heavy door swung open, it must have sounded like the whole castle breathing out. Beyond it stretched McGonagall's chessboard, a stone battlefield of black and white. The pieces loomed above the children, carved and armed. To cross, they had to take the place of pieces and play. Ron stepped forward. Years of chess in a crowded kitchen suddenly weighed more than any lesson. He positioned Harry and Hermione where he needed them and began to call the moves. One by one, stone figures smashed to rubble. At last, the board demanded a sacrifice. A knight had to fall. Ron climbed into the saddle of that granite horse himself. When he ordered the move that would cost him, the opposing queen brought her weapon down. The crash echoed off the ceiling. Ron hit the floor and did not rise. The magic of the game kept him breathing, but he lay as still as any fallen piece. Harry and Hermione had to leave him there on the cold squares and go on, trusting that their friend would still be alive when they returned. It is a brutal way to prove loyalty. The next room held a troll, huge and already unconscious, club lying beside its outstretched hand. Whether Quirrell had tried to use it and lost control, or whether another teacher had reached it first, no one has ever said clearly. The children crept past its slack face into Snape's chamber, where black and purple flames blocked the doors, and a neat row of potion bottles stood beside a riddle. No charm could blast that barrier. Only clear thinking would. Hermione read the riddle, weighed each line, and chose. One bottle would allow someone to go forward through the black fire, one to go back, the rest would burn or freeze. There was barely a mouthful of the forward draught. She gave it to Harry, drank the backward potion herself, and stepped into the purple flames, returning toward the entrance to fetch help that would arrive too late. Harry walked alone through the black fire into the last chamber, where the mirror of Erist waited, and Quirrell stood with another presence coiled inside him. I never saw that room, but I know this much. Dumbledore had hidden the stone in the mirror with a strange condition. It would appear only to someone who wanted to find it, but not to use it. Quirrell, urged on by the thin, hungry voice of Voldemort at the back of his skull, could never meet that test. Harry could. He saw himself in the glass, holding the stone, felt real weight drop into his pocket, and paid for it at once. Quirrell tried to seize him. Lily's protection flared again. Wherever the man touched the boy, his own skin burned. Voldemort tore free and fled as a bodiless rage. Harry dropped beside the ruined figure that had carried him and woke days later in white sheets. When I sat by his bed, sweets piled at his side, he wanted answers. Why had the stone been here? Why had children been able to reach it? Why had it fallen to him, again, to stand in front of an enemy adults had once failed to stop? Some of those questions still hang in the air above my hut on quiet nights. We can praise the courage that carried 3 first years through traps meant for grown wizards. We can hang banners and hand out points. But we must also ask what kind of world lets its safety rest. Twice on the thin shoulders of the same child. Perhaps you have seen smaller versions of that story too. When Harry woke in the hospital wing, the light fell across his bed in neat white bars. The place smelled of potion and starch, the way it always does after a hard term. Madame Pomfrey fussed around him for hours, before she finally snapped that if I wanted to loom over her patient, I could have 10 minutes and not one more. I squeezed between the beds, feeling clumsy among all that white, and stopped when I saw him. Sweets and parcels were piled high on the little table beside him. Chocolate frogs, toffees, fizzing whizbees, cards that flashed his name in bright colours. A whole school trying to say thank you without really knowing what they were thanking him for. In the middle of it all, Harry looked up, pale and thin, scar standing out sharp on his forehead. He managed a crooked grin that said it was nothing, though the shadows under his eyes told another story. I sat down on the chair that creaked under me and set my bundle on his knees. Before he touched it, the questions came tumbling out. What had happened after he fell? Was the stone safe? Had Voldemort gone? My words are never fancy, but I gave him what truth I had. Dumbledore had reached the last chamber. Quirrell was dead. The thing inside him had torn free and fled again without a body. Nicholas Flamel had agreed to have the stone destroyed. No more elixir to stretch out life, no more lump of power for someone desperate enough to kill for it. Harry frowned at the ceiling for a moment. The thought that a man could calmly give up centuries of life must have sat oddly beside everything the Dursleys had ever taught him about clinging to comfort. Yet I saw his shoulders ease when I said the stone was gone. Its destruction took away one terrible choice from the world. even if it did not answer the question burning behind his eyes. Why had it been him down there? I muttered something about him having a talent for trouble, about being too brave for his own good. He smiled faintly, but we both knew that was not enough. The plainer truth was that he had stepped forward because he could not bear to stand aside. No one had ordered him to go. He had gone because the thought of the stone in the wrong hands was worse to him than the thought of facing fear. Some people move toward danger not because they enjoy it, but because their conscience shoves them. Dumbledore came later, robes whispering softly, spectacles catching the light. He spoke with that gentle voice that somehow carries to the furthest corners. He told Harry what I had never heard him tell anyone so plainly. The protection on Harry's skin came from Lily's choice to die for him. That kind of love, freely given without any hope of saving itself, weaves a magic older than curses. It was why the killing curse had rebounded years before. It was why Quirrell had burned when he tried to lay hands on the boy. Voldemort had never understood such things, and what you despise, you rarely learn to defeat. Harry listened very quietly. To be told that your mother's love is what stands between you and death is a strange gift. It means you were cherished beyond fear. It also means knowing that your life was paid for with someone else's. Grown wizards struggle with that knowledge. Harry lay there at 11, fingers picking at the sheet, trying to fit it beside memories of a cupboard, of cold shoulders, of birthdays no one marked. When Dumbledore left, the ward grew almost too still. I cleared my throat and reached under my coat. There was something I had brought that no headmaster could conjure with words. I pulled out a thick photo album, leather worn at the edges, the work of weeks of letters and favours. Old friends had searched their drawers for me, sending back pictures from days when the war had not yet reached its worst. I set the album on his lap. He opened it carefully, as if afraid the images might fly away. James looked up at him from the first page, hair a mess, grin wide, glasses crooked. Next to him stood Lily, eyes bright, smile soft and fierce at once. On other pages they spun in wedding robes, sat laughing on a sofa, held a baby with a shock of dark hair who reached stubby hands toward the camera. Around them moved Sirius with his lazy swagger, Remus with that shy half-smile, others who had stood with them when the sky was darker than Harry yet knew. He turned the pages slowly, mouth a little open. His fingers hovered a breath above Lily's face, over James's arm thrown round his shoulders when he was still small enough to fit there. In every picture his parents were so alive that for a heartbeat the hospital room felt thinner than the gloss under his fingertips. These were not heroes from someone else's story. They were two young people who had laughed, worried, argued, and loved him before he understood any of those words. My throat burned watching him. I had drunk with James in the Three Broomsticks, had seen Lily scold him and then laugh, had carried Harry as a baby on the worst night of my life. Seeing all that gathered into one book on the knees of the boy who had almost not lived to see it made my eyes sting. I swiped at them with the back of my hand, hoping he would not notice. He did, and looked instantly guilty, as if my tears were some trouble he had caused. I told him he had a right to these faces, a right to know that his story began in warmth, not only in green light and a ruined house, that before they died for him, his parents had simply lived with him. The world would speak often of the night they fell, I wanted him to carry proof of the mornings before that, when his mother tied her hair back with one hand and held him with the other, when his father bounced him on his knee and boasted about him to anyone who would listen. He thanked me in a voice that barely rose above the sheets. For a while we sat without speaking, listening to the quiet tick of Madame Pumphrey's clock. On the page in front of us, James ruffled baby Harry's hair on a loop. Lily waved again and again. Time in the ward moved forward. Time in the photographs never would. Somewhere between those two currents, the boy in the bed began to belong to his own past in a new way. Madame Pumphrey chased me out soon enough, muttering about overexcited patients. I went back down through the corridors with heavy steps and a strange thread of hope. Harry's body would mend. The darkness outside the castle walls had not vanished, only retreated. Yet he now had more than a scar and a legend other people whispered about him. He had a book that said you were loved before the world ever asked you to be brave. We may ask ourselves what we owe any child who finds themselves standing where grown folk should have stood. We must tell them the truth, sharp as it is. We must warn them of danger and cost. But we must also, whenever we can, place in their hands some proof that they were wanted long before they were needed. That, more than any medal or title, may be what keeps their courage from turning into nothing but duty. The end of the school year came with ink-stained fingers, exams pressed down on every year group, and that did more to make Hogwarts feel normal again than any speech could. Rumours about what had happened beneath the castle still flickered along the corridors, but most days I saw Harry only as a thin boy bent over parchment, trying to remember which plants healed and which made you itch. When the last exam ended, summer air pushed through the windows. Warm and green-scented, students poured outside as if released from a spell. I found Harry and his friends on the slope above my pumpkins, Fang snoring at their feet, talking about brooms and lessons, and how strange it was that this castle now felt more like home than the houses they had left behind. By the front doors, the house hourglasses told a different story. Slytherin's emeralds towered in their glass, promising banners of green and silver. Gryffindor's rubies lay low, bled away by dragons, forests, and one stone few knew about. Ron scowled whenever he passed them. Harry only glanced and walked on, but his shoulders tightened all the same. The leaving feast lit the great hall brighter than usual. Candles floated low, and the ceiling showed a deep, calm sky. Food appeared, talk rose, and at the staff table people muttered in low voices about bravery and recklessness, about what children should and should not be asked to face. Dumbledore watched in silence, as if the answer he needed lay somewhere among the noise. When he finally stood, the hall fell quiet. He named Slytherin the winners, and their table erupted. Then, in that mild voice, he announced a few last-minute points. Ron, for choosing to fall so that others could move. Hermione, for cool thought in the face of fire. Harry, for going after the stone when he expected nothing in return. With each name, rubies spilled into Gryffindor's glass until red slid past green and the banners above us shifted, green and silver melting into red and gold. The hall exploded a second time. Gryffindors pounded the tables and dragged Harry, Ron, and Hermione to their feet. At the Slytherin table, shoulders slumped and faces shut down. No celebration is clean. Somewhere, someone always feels wronged. Yet, from where I sat, I saw what mattered most. For once, Harry was being honoured not as a baby who survived something done to him, but as a boy who had chosen, with clear eyes and shaking hands, to walk toward danger, because his conscience said, "Go." The castle grew quieter in the days that followed, doors swinging less often, portraits folding their arms and settling in, ready to wait. Harry came to my hut one last evening, standing just inside the doorway, as if trying to fix every crooked shelf and smoke-stained beam in his memory. We talked about homework and Quidditch, and next year, until the light outside faded. Then he mentioned the Dursleys with a shrug that did not hide his dread. I told him he would not be walking back into that house as the same boy. A year of being chosen, teased, defended, and scolded had written a new story inside him. Once you have heard your name spoken with pride, it is harder for contempt to sound like the whole truth. Departure. Morning came bright and clear. The great hall filled with trunks and cages, with students in muggle clothes talking a little too loudly. Outside, the Hogwarts Express waited, all red paint and steam. I helped haul luggage aboard. Harry and Ron leaned from a window, Hermione between them already talking about books for next year. The whistle blew, the train began to move, and I walked beside it for a few steps, hand raised, until Harry's grin and his waving arms slid away around the bend, and the voices thinned to nothing. I stayed on the platform until the last sound had gone. Behind me, the castle stood tall and quiet. The forest breathed. The lake held the sky. In that stillness, the year passed through my mind in a single slow sweep. The motorbike and the bundle in my arms, the shack in the storm, Diagon Alley opening, the first dive after a dropped glass ball, the dragon in my hearth, the mirror's cruel kindness, a boy in white sheets holding an album of his parents. From first knock on a muggle door to the whistle of the train, a circle had closed. He was going back now to a narrow bed on a street that liked its life small, yet he carried more than robes and books. He carried a wand that had chosen him, an owl that would link one world to another, proof that his life had begun in love. Above all, he carried a truer story about himself, not a burden, not an accident, but someone for whom others had already risked much, and for whom one day he would risk more than he yet understood. As I walked up the slope toward my hut, the grass soft under my boots, I thought of the years ahead and felt fear I could not shake. Yet threaded through it was something quieter, a stubborn trust that when darkness rose again, there would be those willing to stand, and that the boy I had once carried through the night would choose, in his own way, to be among them. The world beyond Hogwarts can be cruel and forgetful. It may try to press him back into a cupboard, whether made of wood or of other people's expectations. But the castle will travel with him in the way he reaches for the left out, in the way he steps toward what frightens him, in the way he remembers that he was loved before he was ever asked to be brave. Stories do not end just because a school year does. They linger at platforms and behind shut bedroom doors, under thin blankets where minds wander to distant towers. As I opened my own door and Fang pushed past my knees, I let myself picture the train bringing Harry back, taller, perhaps a little more scarred, but with that same spark in his eyes. Until then, the tale of his first year would hang in the air like the last note of a song, asking anyone who hears it to listen a moment longer and to wonder, when their own mirror or forest or hidden choice appears, which path of courage they will take.